So we created this award 3 years ago to celebrate efforts in conservation technology. It, as I mentioned yesterday, has nothing to do with EarthRanger. We just really wanted to encourage the creation and adoption of technology throughout conservation because we strongly believe in the potential and the applications that it can have, as I hope everyone in the room by this point is bought into. But we divided it into two different awards. One to recognize the way that people adopt technology and apply it in creative and impactful ways. And the second award is for people that create conservation technology and deal with all of the unique challenges that brings. And so very happy to award the 2023 Conservation Technology Award for Outstanding Adoption of Conservation Technology. This was actually the tightest competition that we have had to date. So there were many amazing projects and programs and organizations that applied for this, but there's one that stood out, and I'm really happy to announce that we are awarding this year's award to Mount Kenya Trust. And here to talk more about Mount Kenya Trust's operations and really what caught the attention of our judges is Daisy Owiro, the Grants and Communications Manager for Mount Kenya Trust. Where's Daisy? I also, thanks to our very multi-talented user experience and UI design team, we also, for the first time, have a very fancy trophy that I'll hold it for you so you can get to speak with. Thank you very much, Daisy. Whatever you prefer.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Daisy Owiro, Communications and Grants Manager with Mount Kenya Trust. So Mount Kenya Trust is a Kenyan-based nonprofit organization that works towards enriching the Mount Kenya ecosystem and also preserving the Mount Kenya ecosystem. We're just part of a large network of stakeholders, some of who are here today, such as Lewa and Borana as well. And we basically work on a couple of projects, including forest restoration, wildlife and habitat protection, education, water conservation, wildlife mitigation, and human and community health services. So these are all under pillars: people, water, wildlife, and forests. So first of all, on behalf of Mount Kenya Trust, we are really honored to receive the Conservation Tech Award. This is just a fast, bold step towards a whole world of possibilities. Not even for us, but just for the communities and our young, growing population in the Mount Kenya region. The reason why, so through the Junior Ranger program, we basically work around conservation education, and we also utilize tech because in an ever-evolving world, we need our young people to also, we need to open up the opportunity for our young people to create and innovate. It's one thing for conservation organizations to create the solutions and train the communities to implement, but if we want to have a sustainable, if we want to have people carrying on our work as conservation organizations, we really need to train this young population towards also creating and innovating. So we conducted a pilot we conducted a pilot for the Junior Ranger program, and we were able to reach 1,136 students across 12 schools, and we noted a 98% satisfaction rate among students and teachers. So previously, before we launched the pilot, we conducted a survey in the schools and kind of asked a couple of questions, including their perception of rangers, their perception of how they perceive wildlife, and whether they consume bushmeat. And surprisingly, they actually admit 98% of the students admitted to, actually it was about 100 even, who admitted to consume bushmeat, like it was something normal in their households. You know, a child imitates what happens within the environment. So some of these things we say that they're wrong, but for them, it's what they grew into. So they think it's pretty normal. Some will tell you that I don't like rangers because the rangers arrested my dad, my uncle, such things, So, so through delivering our Junior Ranger program, we noticed a shift into the 100% shift into matters conservation. One interesting thing we noted is some parents even gave us feedback that their children refused to consume the bushmeat, and the parents were forced to actually go and seek alternative protein sources. Yeah, so basically we, and also when it comes to measuring student comprehension and adoption rates, we do assessments as well. So based on the assessments, we realized that 98% of the students were really passed the tests after the modules that we delivered. So through the Conservation Tech Award, like I said, it's just the first step towards a huge world of possibilities. So we intend on modifying our learner management system. So through that, we'll be able, so the learner management system will go hand in hand with the hardware repair. Instead of purchasing new computers and laptops for the schools, the government of Kenya previously worked on a laptop project for schools, a digital literacy project for schools. But there was a gap in the sense that they gave these devices and there was nobody to manage them. So whenever you go to these schools, they're just sitting somewhere at a corner because nobody's there. The teachers weren't trained to even do a simple update. And honestly, that is what we see mostly happening even on the digital literacy programs often. So what we are going to do is collect all this. Once the beneficiaries have been selected, we are going to collect all this tablets and work on repairing them and then installing the CBC curriculum in line with our modules, the conservation education modules. And this will create more of a hands-on experience and access to this, to basically our program. And through the learner management system, we are going to monitor various aspects. Let me just head there. So through the learner management system, the students will be able to access 100 courses, and this will be in form of games, in form of word and number processing. They're going to enhance their digital skills, digital art skills. They're going to learn about cybersecurity. But then this will be, all this will be delivered in form of like a conservation, through our conservation program, through our conservation course content. So the activities will cut across, And so through that, we will be able to schedule classes. Now, this is very important because we come into schools, basically. We teach them, we show them how to go about it. But how do we monitor once we leave 2 years later? So through the devices and through this system, we'll be able to monitor how many schools are still using the portal, the platform, and for how long, the frequency, and whatnot. And the system is going to be, the learner management system is going to be very interactive, very simple, and it's going to allow for offline access. So this will help us monitor the adaptability rate in schools years later, monitor impacts, monitor the activities that take place, and also we will be able to prompt schools to do certain activities like 3 months later plant trees and etc. Besides the learner management system and the hardware repair and modification, we'll do capacity building and training on all levels, including our education officers. And also for teachers. For teachers, it's very important because they're, like I mentioned before, the gaps when it comes to, like we mentioned before, the gaps when it came to the previous digital literacy program. So we will be able to train the teachers on doing like basic hardware maintenance and basic software maintenance and whatnot. And as we have our internal IT people to work on the very complex maintenance activities. So besides all this, there is the aspect where students are given the opportunity to go out there to the parks, like for instance the Borana Conservancy, to just do game drives, so that they can also just interact with wildlife and see, and just look at the beauty that their home has to offer, the whole world, But basically, that is about the Junior Ranger program. When it comes to strengthening relationships with rangers, so the children interact with rangers a lot, even during as we go to schools. So what basically happens is that we kind of make them spend more time with rangers so that it can build that relationship. Sometimes you find that rangers narrate to them their stories and you find these children even crying because they don't even know. They literally develop a very different perception of rangers as compared to what they have been taught. Now, moving forward, this system is going to, when it comes to scaling up, there are so many ways in which this system can be scaled up from the Junior Ranger program. We can also use it for our adolescent sexual reproductive health program, which also works with teenagers to creating a safe space, so that, again, it's part of a child's growth towards providing an opportunity for these children to grow into decision makers who are responsible for the environment, but also are provided with opportunities so that they don't go back to illegal activities. They don't grow into illegal activities and whatnot, and also just for working on our conservation agriculture training. So this is just a first of how we are adopting tech into our program, but there is more to come. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Daisy. And one of the criteria for the Tech Adopter Award is the ability for the project to scale and influence others. And as you can see, it's really an inspiring project that's already showing great success. And we really look forward to seeing the impact that it'll have, not just at Mount Kenya, but around the country and around the world. So thank you again. Before I continue, does anyone know that a pangolin's tongue can be the entire length of its body? Such awesome animals. So it's my great honor to introduce Jean Labuschagne from African Parks. Jean is a South African native, which, if you've been following the path of the Webb Ellis Cup today, you know what a sacrifice it is for her to be here today, so we really appreciate it. Jean spent her childhood among the national parks of Malawi, Tanzania, and Kenya, where she developed a deep passion for conservation work and also the communities around conservation areas, which she now brings to her role as African Parks Manager of Conservation Development. Manager, Director, I might have the title slightly wrong. Director? All right, we'll give you titles. Vice President? Okay. So now promoted Jean, but Jean, thank you so much for talking with us today.
Thank you very much, Jess. So thank you very much, and thanks so much for allowing me to speak here today. Just following on from Daisy's presentation on your very well-deserved award, I think it's a very fitting kind of award because it's something that, for me, I'm only standing here today because of those experiences that I had, as well as my sister, who's also sitting here with me. And when Jess first asked me if I'd like to speak today, I started thinking back just on my kind of journey with tech, but more specifically, actually, with situational awareness. And I think it went back to 1995. So this is a picture of my mother painting a map of the floor of Ngorongoro crater with those cute little pots of enamel paint that we used to do model airplane building. And it was on a sheet of metal, and using magnets, she would put up where the rhino were and where the patrols were. And that map is still standing in Ngorongoro today in the ranger post. And I very clearly remember that and kind of trace that back to my very first experience. If we then move 20 years later, when I was in the same shoes as my mother was in 1995, working in Garamba National Park in DRC, and patiently waiting for EarthRanger to come on, but basically spending my time Googling what an API was and trying to get spider tracks and alarm and everything else to feed into our Google Earth in the ops room, which I had helped set up in Garamba. And a lot of my gray hairs came from this period. And then if we fast forward to today, I think just to say what an incredible tool this is built in or developed to be. And I think the number of people sitting in this room is really testament to that. And this is our most recent 2 parks that we signed in South Sudan. The team in Juba, within a couple of weeks, we had EarthRanger up and running, information flowing in. I think 9 people from Juba were trained to use it. And it's just incredible to see how that progression has come from that painted map 30 years ago. So, I think before I get into kind of who African Parks is and what we do, I always like to just take a step back and remind ourselves about why we're here. I know I'm speaking a little bit to the converted, but I think it's just important to always take that step back. I don't think any of us doubts that we need nature. We're all here today because of that very reason, and if we are to thrive, biodiversity is to thrive, we are to thrive, we need to ensure that our nature is protected. It's been articulated, quantified, valued. There are reports, pages and pages of reports on it, and all very important documents, I might add. But what we really do need to step into now and ensure that we're doing that at scale is the actual doing and the implementation. If we bring that to the African context, and I think it's important to remember that I think the African context is a specific context. We've got 25% of the world's biodiversity, high poverty levels, which means a very high dependency on natural resources, a growth rate that is 3 times higher than the rest of the world. Now, yes, a lot of that growth will be in certain parts of Africa, like West Africa and East Africa, but it's still a reality that there will be a huge dependency on the resources that we still have. Governance challenges, I mean, that's globally, but very much in Africa. And then I think an important thing is the inadequate public funding. I think McKinsey did a study that showed that if you look at the burden of protected area management in Africa based on the GDP, I think ours is a 65 times higher burden than Europe. And that's just a reality that we need to be very much aware of. This is taken a couple of years after I was born. It's a satellite image of West Africa. It's a bit blurry on this screen, but and I just often bring it up because that's where we are in 2020, and I'm just going to repeat it for effect. You can see how that Sahel is literally moving down and is about to hit the Gulf of Guinea. And if you bring in just the sort of very specific context of where, in terms of looking at where those protected areas are, you can really start to see them to pop. So here you could almost not see what is called the W. Ali Penjari context. And when you come down here, it really stands out. And that manifests itself into what we're seeing today in the Sahel. This is a slightly outdated map, but a breakdown in governance, a loss of natural resources, causing very high poverty levels, and it's just this vicious cycle where people become way more susceptible to extremist activities. The 2 green dots at the top north of Benin are Penjari and W National Park, where we're working. And it's just a kind of relentless pressure coming from that broader Sahel region. As you saw in that map, those protected areas really do pop. But I think it's really important, and I know that many of you will understand this, but just to realize that just because an area has been gazetted as a protected area does not mean it is going to survive into the future. We always say at African Parks that what is not being managed will be lost. That is managed by a government, by an NGO, by communities. Land needs to be managed if it's going to survive into the future, particularly with the context that I explained earlier with Africa in terms of population growth. So this is just a screenshot of the WDPA, the World Database of Protected Areas in Ivory Coast and Liberia. Looks really good, a lot of protected areas there. One can imagine if they'd all been managed with agriculture in between them, what an incredible mosaic that would have been. If you overlay that with the human footprint layer, and sorry, this I think some of the PowerPoint didn't always come through on the screen, but human footprint layer and deforestation, you can start to see what the reality looks like on the ground. And in actual fact, a lot of that deforestation is concentrated inside the forest reserves because they're the only areas that still have forest cover left to cut down. So when we were all stuck in COVID and couldn't leave South Africa, we basically started to look at that protected area network in Africa because everyone keeps saying, Africa is 15% of it is gazetted, which is an amazing figure, but if you start to look at the reality, it's unfortunately isn't the case. So what we did was look at areas of scale, as well as areas that were still relatively intact, and basically came up with what we believe are 161 areas. That is not the magic number, and every time I speak about these areas, everyone says, oh, but this park's not in there, and that one's not in there. It's about a framework of thinking where we can really develop a foundation off of which a global or a continental strategy for conservation can be built. And while it's only 2% of the roughly 8,500 areas gazetted in Africa, it actually represents nearly a quarter of the protected surface area. And also 85% of the ecoregions are represented in that, which we took as a proxy for biodiversity. And then at a sort of a very high level, effectively a judgment, we believe that there's still around 60 of those that need a good management solution, both technical and financial resources, to ensure that those areas will perpetuate into the future. So just in terms of of African parks and what we do, and trying to link a little bit back to the theme of this conference, and just it takes an enormous group and village of people to make conservation work. So African Parks was founded in 2000, and effectively as a protected area service provider. So we partner with governments and communities to manage their protected areas on their behalf, and in turn are directly accountable to them for achieving results on the ground. Our first partnership was actually signed in Liwa Plain National Park in 2003. I don't know if many of you know, but the Barotse Royal Establishment is a kingdom, the Lozi people in Western Zambia. We believe that, or in talking with them, they actually had proclaimed Liwa as a protected area before Yellowstone, and basically to protect the hunting grounds of the king. And this image is a picture of Komboka ceremony, where the king moves from his summer house to his winter palace, called the Letunga, which I think actually means keeper of the earth, which is quite a beautiful meaning. But effectively, the Barotse Royal Establishment were having a lot of problems with people coming from the copper belt to overfish and overhunt their resources, and they were looking for a solution to help them manage their resources better. And with DNPW in Zambia, that was our very first partnership that we signed. And then very soon after that, Majeti in Malawi. And there's a lot of talk and focus on which approach and which model, and it has a title. And I think we really believe that it's important to those sort of classifications are helpful, but it's actually about focusing on the fundamentals. So it's all of our projects or all of our partnerships, it's a long-term commitment. Conservation is a long game. You cannot be in there just for a short period of time, especially if you want to start seeing socioeconomic development, attracting investment, etc. Key for us is avoiding the gray area. Everything that we do is centered on accountability. We're accountable to our government partners, our community partners, our donor partners, and there has to be a clear entity that is accountable for those results. Revenue reinvested into the project. This is, we would love to say, to help really build financial sustainability, and obviously that is the ultimate goal. But it's more important from a perspective of, if you can reinvest that revenue into the protected area, the shortfall is then sought through donor funding, and we then call it that the donor dollar is the last dollar. So the donors are covering a shortfall after we have first tried to basically make that revenue at a site level, and that really helps to attract good donor funding. Jugular for us, and it's linked to the second point that I mentioned, is having responsibility for all personnel. If we're going to be accountable to our partners, governments, communities, donors, we have to have the right skill set to be able to do the job. But importantly, we also have to ensure that if anybody does operate outside of the law, and that's always a possibility, it's a human being as an individual that can always operate in their own capacity, we need to ensure that we can discipline that person and or send them into the judiciary process, because we are accountable for how that individual is acting. And then our agreements are always structured within the national legislation, and in respect of any established use rights in that area. And then I think just last, this is one of our values actually as African Parks, but tangible results. It's a relentless focus and a relentless push from our entire team, and I think that accountability, it's an accountability to our external partners, but very much so within our own teams. Nobody is as strong on ourselves as we are within the team. And then just quickly, because often this is very misunderstood, so we talk about 3 layers of governance. The macro level, it's the government. They're always the owner. We never take over ownership of an area. They determine the legislation. They provide that statutory oversight. And I'm going to jump down to the micro first. At a micro level, at each individual park, that is where African Parks will come in as that management partner with the full responsibility for the day-to-day management so that we can be accountable to the government. And then where the marriage happens is at that middle level. Every single park has a local governance body or a board that has African Parks, key stakeholders and government sitting on that. And they basically provide the strategic oversight of the project. They approve the business plans, the budgets, and help with just general risk management of the project. And then sorry, I think it went from a Mac to Windows, so some of the editing's wrong. But basically what we look at when we go into each individual park, this is what we call the 3 M's. It's a bit like this, just the key ingredients. Everything is predicated on that mandate that we negotiate with governments. It can take anywhere from a year to 20 years to negotiate an agreement. Very clear roles and responsibilities, separating management responsibility from the kind of statutory responsibility. Each individual park is its own business unit that has management applied to it. We call it the 3 pillars, that sort of biodiversity conservation, community development, and park revenue generation. And then every project operates within a very clear framework. So it's a decentralized management approach. So the park manager, who's effectively the CEO of the protected area, they have the latitude to implement, as long as it is within the mandate that they have with government, the business plan and budget that's been agreed, the standard operating procedures, and the national legislation. But then they can get on and do the job and not have to worry too much about a very top-down heavy sort of structure. And then, of course, there's creating that enabling environment for revenue-generating activities, attracting donor funding, attracting tourism concessionaires, whatever that may be, but just enabling that lift of the system. So just in terms of where AP is today, since that first agreement that was signed in 2003, so we're now managing 22 protected areas in 12 different countries in Africa, which at an active management scale is 20 million hectares. Just over 5,000 employees, most of which are African nationals. And then the annual budget this year was 110 million. And you can see there only 10% of that comes from tourism, and the rest is then through donor funding. So I wanted to weave in, obviously, tech and data, and it's when you sort of trying to take it back a step, it can be a little bit difficult to find what is a golden thread. You guys are all the experts in terms of how to use collars and how to use the various technologies that are available. So I'm not going to stand here and explain all of that. But I do want to just speak a little bit about two key elements. And one is the softer side of some of the tech. So many of you will have spoken or be very familiar with using satellite tracking collars. African Parks has done a lot of work with collars. I think we have just under 500 collars that are actively now on species across the entire portfolio. But I think often what we've found is one of the sort of softer sides of using technology like this is the engagement opportunity that you can get. So that photo on the left was actually taken by my father in Zakuma in Chad. It was one of the first elephants we ever collared. Basically all of the religious leaders in that area came to bless the elephant, and it was just the most incredible day, and just that whole collaring exercise, TV Chad did a video on it, and it was played, I don't know, I think 150 times in a year for kind of the next 5 years. And I remember coming into N'Djamena several times, and you go through security, and as soon as you're saying you're going to Zakuma, everyone just said, please go through. And there was just so much pride, and so much of that came from this collaring video that was aired. This is the Sultan of Kasangor. This is a beautiful village in Boma National Park in South Sudan. Kasangor was quite a big elephant poaching village, and they admitted it very openly. South Sudan, everyone just says exactly what they think and what they're doing. But after this experience of collaring elephant in Boma, Kasangora have basically said that they are not going to poach elephant at all anymore, and they've become one of our strongest conservation kind of advocates in that whole area, and that came from one experience of basically being with this elephant. And then I think the second, so that's just, I think collaring it's such an amazing tool beyond just the data that it can give. But I think we're really excited with kind of data and data collation, and obviously so much of that being facilitated by EarthRanger is starting to look at the long-term game and really looking at conservation at scale. So this is a map that someone in our team produced recently. The gray is effectively built-up areas in Africa. And you can see that huge swathe of green in the middle, which basically covers a lot of eastern CAR and South Sudan. So Chinko, for many of you, if you're not familiar, is the big green bit in the middle. We've been managing Chinko since, I think, 2014. And then you can see Zakuma and Sinyakamania up in Chad, and then down in the southeast is Garamba National Park. Chinko is one of the most incredibly biodiverse and intact habitats in Africa. You can go down the Chinko River for well over 500 kilometers, and you will not see any sign of any human being. In the north, it's got kudu, and then the south, it's got bongo. And we've been basically working over the last 10 years and just collecting as much data as we possibly can from numerous different sources. Obviously, camera traps, wildlife collars, but one of the most incredible data collection that we've had, and also success stories, is what we call the tango teams that we're using in Chinko. So when Sudan split with South Sudan in 2011, and I'll just go back to the map, there was a huge influx of pastoralism that came into CAR because they couldn't go into South Sudan because of the conflict between the two countries. And so basically overnight, hundreds of thousands of head of cattle started moving into CAR, obviously all heavily armed, and we just saw basically in a year a drop of the megafauna in the Chinko region. It's the central green part is about 26,000 square kilometers, but that whole eastern CAR is 100,000 square kilometers, so it's an enormous area. And basically the tango approach, which we started in Chinko and we're now replicating in other areas, is we've employed the local herders. They wear bright orange or bright yellow, and they spend all of their time engaging with the pastoralists as they're coming down. We've gone right into the Darfur region to engage with the sultans directly, who are the owners of most of the cattle. And all of that information is being collated, but importantly, it's created this incredible engagement opportunity around Chinko. Obviously, aerial surveillance is an incredibly important element there. Just as a little segue, depending on the rebel activity in the country, a truck from Bangui, which is the capital, can take up to a year to get up to Chinko. I think a bag of cement is between $100 and $150 by the time it gets to Chinko, so everything is incredibly remote and incredibly expensive. And so aerial surveillance is key, and basically anytime they spot fires, they spot herders that are getting too close to the boundary of the park, the tango teams are then deployed by helicopter to go and engage with those herders. And what we've found is over the years with pulling this information together with these engagement activities, that we've gone from 2016, where we effectively were keeping around 5,000 square kilometers free of cattle, to now over 25,000. And at any one time, there are not more than 30 rangers on duty in Chinko. So that's 26,000 square kilometers of completely remote, unfenced Central Africa, that is being kept free of illegal activity, largely because of this tango approach. And it's had incredible results. Huge increase. All the wildlife populations are basically back to pre sort of 2011 numbers. And we've also seen an amazing impact on the fire pattern. So this is the 3 hottest months where most of the Sahel burns, and you can see there that Chinko harbors 1 billion tons of carbon, according to all the estimates, and that's basically being managed now. But what's really exciting, and that's what all of this was getting to, is starting to basically take this data, look at the trends, and start to develop land use planning at scale. So Chinko, over the last 10 years, has been working on a sort of mega land use plan. Every single one of those polygons, there's been a process, there's been engagement with those communities. It's a bit difficult to see, but those little circles are all completely sustainable grazing units. And if this plan is fully implemented, nearly 500,000 head of cattle can sustainably graze in eastern CAR. And as I said, we've done a lot of engagement right up into Darfur and Sudan. There's huge buy-in for this. They understand that if they don't start managing these natural resources, that pressure is just going to keep pushing them south. And then, of course, there's that conflict that comes with pastoralists engaging with sedentary populations that is causing a lot of insecurity in the region. And this is now currently being adopted at a national government level. It's got all the participation at the local level, and basically we will start rolling this out in as soon as that government agreement comes in. And then all of these lessons that we've learned in Chinko, in these kind of large, intact, very remote landscapes, we're now taking across to South Sudan. So this is the Minister of Wildlife Conservation and Tourism, collaring white-eared cob earlier this year. We collared just over 120 animals in South Sudan. For any of you who don't know South Sudan, it's honestly one of the most unbelievable landscapes I've ever spent time in. The numbers are really astonishing. We did a systematic reconnaissance flight earlier this year, and still working through those results, but it's going to be quite a mind-blowing, I think, outcome. But there's nowhere that I think humans and people are so interwoven into the fabric of a landscape as South Sudan. This is the king of the Anuak on the left, it's Mundari in the middle, and the Jie on the right. And these communities live across this entire landscape with these herds of animals. So the blue is all of the collar data from the sort of 6 months since the collaring exercise, and the red is the human population that was picked up in the survey. And you can see how that pattern across the landscape is starting to develop, and what we're going to do now in the coming years is continue to collect that data so that we can start to really work through a land use plan like we've done in Chinko in South Sudan. So just to wrap up a bit, I think everyone always asks us what lessons we've learned, and we could do a whole conference on lessons often learnt the hard way. I think one thing that we have seen is just that approach, and again, focus on the fundamentals. It can really transcend contexts, whether you're up in Benin dealing with sort of extremist activity, or down in Bazaruto in Mozambique, trying to find better fisheries mechanisms. If applied consistently and with that strong focus on accountability and results, it basically can work anywhere. It isn't easy, but I think everyone knows that, and the challenges that we face on a daily basis is really incredibly varied, and there are a lot, but we've got to just keep going. I think something that we really have realized the importance of and are continually working on is that balance between scale and quality. You can have 100 different sites and just be affecting them at a very micro level, or you can have one site and be really, really focused and doing an amazing job. And of course, both are important, but where we're trying to kind of chart our path is always trying to maintain that balance between scale, but not forsaking on the quality. As I've said several times, but just that focus on accountability and results. And then something is that we've seen so much is that trust, mutual trust, will really accelerate delivery. We're asking or expecting that governments and communities are giving us the responsibility to manage their natural resources that they own, but in the same vein, we are asking donors to invest millions of dollars into areas that we do not own. So it's a trusting relationship that needs to be built between ourselves and the partners that we work with. And then just a little bit in terms of where we're going to from here. We would like to continue to grow and support more governments and communities in managing their areas. So we have an objective of managing 30 protected areas by 2030, with hopefully 30 million hectares under management. We are starting to see, like I showed with Chinko in South Sudan, just more and more what a role sort of these anchor or core protected areas can play in the broader landscape and what they have to play in the broader landscape. And that's obviously a word that everyone throws around very easily, but the reality of making those landscapes work at scale takes a lot. And we're starting to really try and work through that strategy and weaving it into what we do, but really in terms of how we can deliver on that in reality. The third point is just something that I don't know if everyone knows about, but we have what we call an incubator program, which we do need to find a better name for, but basically where we partner with small or young organizations and walk the journey with them. We share our standard operating procedures with them, we sit in on interviews, we provide support and help them to do what we do. And there's at least one sitting in the crowd here today, who's about to walk that journey with us, and we're incredibly excited about that. And then second last one is we're hoping to roll out an African Parks Conservation Academy in Rwanda. We're still a little bit in the planning phase, but we've really seen a need for kind of heads of departments and park managers and the management training that they need that is practical, from donor engagement to how to do a budget to how to set up a workshop. And also a course that doesn't take people out of the field for too long at a time. So we are in the process of that, and obviously we'll be communicating more. And then lastly, which is a small project that we've recently started, is trying to figure out how we're going to rewild 2,000 rhino, which is very exciting. So just before, I end, we've just got a short video that, just to wake you all up on a Friday morning, which just basically highlights who we are, what we do, but more importantly, just some beautiful visuals from these incredible landscapes that we have the privilege of working in.
Torrential rains caused catastrophic flooding. Drought exacerbating the hunger crisis. Fires are still burning. The calamity of epic proportion.
Thank you very much.
I don't even know as a MC how to follow that, but yeah, African Parks has been one of our longest and closest partners since the beginning of EarthRanger, and I've had the privilege of visiting about half a dozen of them. 2 EarthRanger user conferences have been hosted at African Park sites, and what I'm always most amazed by is their ability to, without exception, hire really incredible people at all levels of the organization, and to witness the transformation that parks go through when African Parks takes over management of it is just really awe-inspiring. So really thank you, Gene, and thank you to the whole African Parks team. I'm going to give that so with that, we turn you loose to the second day of the user conference. Please have a great time, learn a lot, and come back with pangolin facts. There will be a quiz tomorrow.